The decade of the roaring 1920s begins with a time of sickness. We're going to examine the mainstream account, starting with the Spanish flu, considered the worst affliction to hit humanity and affecting all the lands, killing anywhere from 25 to 50 million people, and some accounts saying as many as 100 million people. This followed World War I, and I find it intriguing that studying history as I did in the end of the 20th century, this event was not really mentioned. It was falsely attributed to have started in Spain because of media accounts at the time, but official accounts say that the news was suppressed because it started in the trenches of World War I. Although the exact origin of the Spanish influenza remains unknown. We're accepting the mainstream account because it's quite intriguing. And in addition to this sickness, we also had the Russian Revolution, the rise of the Bolsheviks and communism, the establishment of the Soviet Union. The Russian Civil War was a very terrifying event that occurred before the end of World War I and ended in the early 1920s. It killed millions and yet involved all the great nations of the land, to include the former Allies. Oddly enough, there are many Americans who seem unaware, and it's certainly not mentioned in history, that there was a rather extensive American presence within Russia, or what would become the Soviet Union at that time. Here, as you can see, Old Glory being carried by American soldiers as they march in Vladivostok. So, a series of accounts, a war that continued into the early 1920s. Indeed, I'm fascinated by the fact the United States doesn't really seem to mention the fact that there was the presence of American forces such as the 339th Infantry Regiment in the ill-fated Polar Bear expedition, landing at Archangel. Quite an intriguing series of accounts with these American soldiers who fought across Siberia in Russia. And while the United States may not like to recount or admit this, it is still in official histories and it's still in official U.S. Army unit histories. We can certainly assume that no one in Russia ever forgot about this. And indeed, this is what justified a lot of the Soviet fears of the American expansion, and certainly the fears that followed World War II. It's just interesting when you consider all the history. So, we have this terrifying Russian Revolution, we have the end of World War I, and we have the Spanish flu. Sickness and conflict. It seems like the world's not the best of places to start in the 1920s. There's also the forgotten Soviet-Polish War. And this happened right after the Soviet or the Russian Revolution was complete, and it involved the Russian forces moving in against Poland, oddly enough mirroring current events. And there's a lot of people who say that the 2020s mirrors what happened in the 1920s, and I suppose in some ways you can consider this to be true. Somehow the Polish forces managed to pull a miraculous victory in the Battle of Warsaw, and they managed to prevent the threat of Soviet forces in Central Europe. Looking at the 1920s timeline from the US perspective, we see we have prohibition on alcohol. We gave women the right to vote in the United States, and of course across the rest of the land. We had Warren Harding as president, who promised a return to normalcy. We had the Teapot Dome scandal, where there was actually a cabinet member in the US government that went to prison. Calvin Coolidge, the very taciturn and hands-off president, as many people remember him as. The National Origins Act, which finally limited immigration in the United States after decades of allowing everyone to immigrate to the United States. The Scopes trial, science and religion, the jazz singer, and then of course President Herbert Hoover, and the stock market crash, which ended the 1920s. And this is really a broad sweeping of events. But stepping back and looking at the 1920s a little bit more deliberately, we see that it was a period of prosperity. Now, you might be interested to know that in mainstream historical circles, especially towards the end of the 1900s or the 20th century, however you want to refer to it, they considered this the interwar period. And even looking at all these different cities, whether we're looking at New York City or the Midwest of the United States, and we'll look at a few European cities and even Australia through this exploration, we can see that there's no shortage of wondrous structures and buildings that were already built at that time in the early to mid-1920s. Although we're going to examine one of the most exotic and amazing architectural styles, the Art Deco period. Considering the fact, though, that the 1920s seemed to begin in an unprecedented manner, we had conflict, we had sickness, we had national strife. It should also be noted that within the United States, which people always look to as the economic leader and indeed saw as the economic boom that drove the 1920s across the rest of the land, that it experienced some internal social strife. Indeed, there was the Red Summer that occurred, which involved a lot of racial tensions, which seems to be a recurring theme in the United States that continues to this day. And oddly enough, here in this view of Paris, you can see the stairways where Dean Corso was assaulted in the film The Ninth Gate. Just a random reference for you. But the conflict can't be forgotten. There was a lot of attempts by nations to try to establish a power structure at the end of World War I. There was also prohibition, limiting alcohol. Now that's certainly a way where things are different from the United States now as opposed to then. We also had the rise of giving women the right to vote, and we had the advent of baseball, which had really started to become popular in the United States in the early 1900s and the 1920s. We even had the initial achievements of aviation, fixed-wing aviation, such as the Spirit of St. Louis and Charles Lindbergh's transatlantic flight. Just don't talk about airships. They don't really apply this time. And then, of course, we have the incessant conflicts and social strife that continued all across the land. And so when you look at all these vast social changes and realizing that the Roaring '20s ended with the unfortunate stock market crash, or Black Tuesday. What is it with Tuesdays always being bad days in the United States anyway? I'm not sure. Maybe M. Bison was really on to something when he said, "For me, it was Tuesday." We have no shortage of very impressive images that show well-developed cityscapes and amazing structures. Also the infrastructure and transportation assets at that time. Here in Berlin, for example, in the 1920s, despite it being the interwar period, we do see a very impressive apartment building that was constructed, according to the mainstream, during the 1920s. Very impressive and beautiful structure, especially during the rule of the Weimar Republic, which was the interwar government of Germany. Many interesting times, and there seem to be exceptions to a lot of the standard rules that was going on. For example, in the United States, the Harding administration, President Harding, had promised a return to normalcy because of all the technological advancements and the conflict that had broken up the 1900s so far. Of course, they had prohibition, the ban on alcohol, and there's many theories about what that was really behind or what was really driving that. There's also here this image of the wondrous Penn Station in New York City, quite an impressive structure. So we look at these series of elaborate and divergent events and how they all seem to play together. One would not expect the 1920s to be a roaring period of prosperity, and indeed there are conflicting accounts in terms of what was really happening. You might also recall that the 1920s was when they built all these amazing theaters that we've looked at in many of our explorations, the Fox theaters and many others. We can also look and see some early images such as Rome. And it's always interesting to me how Rome seems to look different depending on which images you look. Whether you're looking at the Colosseum with the older photos of the late 1800s or here in the 1920s. And oddly enough, it gives you a little bit of a different impression of Rome, especially if you were to go there and visit to this day. Or jumping over to Kansas City, where we have Liberty Tower, what's now the World War I National Monument, in its initial construction. Of course, the only construction photos we get already show the main structure being completed and the tower mostly complete. And you might recall that this tower was featured in the mini-series The Day After. It was completely destroyed by a couple of hydrogen bombs in that particular series. And oddly enough, for some reason, something about that image where Jason Robards is pondering it reminds me of this construction image. Perhaps it's just my mind playing tricks on me. But it is interesting to consider that this wondrous monument was funded by donations, as many of them seem to be. And this was to be the great marker for all the veterans of World War I. And indeed, you can go visit it to this day. And it's quite an impressive structure. There's even the sphinxes that have the wings over their eyes, apparently hiding their eyes from all the horrors that occurred in World War I. In the Weimar Republic in Germany, we had a completely different change of society and culture. Indeed, one of the things the mainstream history tells us is how the actual attitude of women and the identity of women changed a lot after being granted the right to vote. Women were also more present in society, and they began to take more of an individual role. There's also the continued efforts of the Weimar Republic to really have more of an international flavor, again looking at Germany. And it's rather odd when we think of the fact that this is considered the interwar period, although if you actually look into the history of the Weimar Republic in Germany, it seemed to be a lot more international than we might like to think. There's also the fact that this was the period when Germany went with the rise of the rigid airships, and here we have another image of the Graf Zeppelin, the very impressive rigid airship that managed to complete circumnavigating, or going around all the lands, however you want to say it, in a very short amount of time. Some say it took over 20 days, and others say it took, well, much less time. And even when things were in a difficult position for many of the Germans after World War I, here with this little soup distribution to these children, we see these children don't look too particularly unhappy. They seem rather happy, and certainly much happier than what we saw in the workhouses from the Victorian times. Here we have President Calvin Coolidge, the taciturn, very hands-off president. At least that's how history remembers him. He succeeded President Harding after he abruptly passed away and ran for re-election once. He opted not to run for re-election in 1928 because, in his words, no one should be president for such a long time. Apparently, Franklin D. Roosevelt had no such reservations and probably would still be president if he were still alive now, and no one would probably have any issue with it. And I don't think that's too much of a leap in logic. The incessant images, though, that we have that show the activity and the seeming booming period of the 1920s always gives us an impression that it really was a time of prosperity, such as the construction of the shopping plaza in Kansas City, Missouri, the first outdoor shopping mall in, really, some would say, the history of the land, modeled after Spanish architecture, and yet they managed to rapidly complete and erect this at this time. Of course, Kansas City was not the only city that was building a slew of buildings in the wondrous Art Deco or all the other architectural styles at that time, although Art Deco was featured prominently in the 1920s. And no, these other cities didn't have somebody like Tom Prendergast who was just sitting around and making stuff happen, although if you actually look at images of Tom Prendergast, you really have to question what exactly did he make happen, because this prosperity occurred in many other cities where they didn't seem to have one corrupt individual who somehow made things happen. These 1920s images of New York City are extremely impressive and show a city that's more advanced than we might expect to see. And depending on which city that we're looking at, the amount of prosperity and construction in a very short amount of time is very impressive. We're going to actually examine and look at several cities very closely and some of the examples of the structures that they completed. The 1920s is also noted as the time of the one-year wonder structures, where we had many buildings that were completed in a year. Some were completed in 2 years, but it seems as though the construction capabilities had really peaked during the 1920s. Now we go back and we look at the original historical account. We're informed that there was war, we're informed that there was sickness, there were many people who had died from both of these causes. There was also continuing social unrest, not just in the United States, but across the land. Continued conflict, and that continuous conflict between communism, democracy, or East and West, however you want to view it. There's many different ways to view it. And indeed, it goes back to looking at how the 1920s and the 2020s actually compare. Now, there are some similarities, but it's certain to say that the so-called global war on terror that the United States waged from the 2000s to 2010s, all the way up to the early 2020s, if you count Afghanistan, is nothing like what happened in World War I. However, if you're a soldier and you're killed by shrapnel from an artillery round or a mustard gas attack, or whatever, it's no different than if you're a soldier who's killed by an improvised explosive device or a roadside bomb in a global war on terror. So I guess what you say is at the end of the day, if you're killed in action, you're killed in action. Of course, we recall how the 1920s ended with the abrupt stock market crash, caused by greedy speculation. although there are other debates for the causes, such as the government of the United States being too laissez-faire with economic policies. Although it's rather odd when the United States is supposed to be a free market economy, but yet people are always demanding government intervention and centralization. At least, that's supposed to be the solution to all the economic problems. Whatever the reality, the Black Tuesday ended the prosperity. Now let's take a look at Art Deco, future of the past. We haven't really looked at some of the causes or the designs of graphics that innovated to Art Deco, starting with Victorian, Art Nouveau, and then leading to Art Deco. Very interesting that graphic designs up until 1940 played a significant role in architecture. Then after that, not so much of a significant role unless you count postmodern. And what's really artistic about postmodern? Nothing really. I like 2010, flat, minimalist, no depth, straight lines. Does that not describe a lot, if not all of the architectural styles that we see to this day? So what's the origin of Art Deco? 1910. Early roots drew inspiration from various sources. Cubism, Futurism, and a school of design. Very intriguing that it was just one random school of design that suddenly influenced Art Deco. It's also intriguing when you think that there were several structures from the early 1900s that already reflected the signs of Art Deco. In 1920, Art Deco architecture, characterized by ornate detailing and geometric shapes, gains popularity, influencing building design worldwide. But then in 1930, the Great Depression really affected the popularity of it, leading to a shift towards more streamlined and simplified designs. Of course, we know that's a conflicting account because there were still many Art Deco buildings that were completed through the 1930s. It was really World War II that ended it, and even here they say it. It's World War II that disrupts it because resources shift to building 1,000 ships for the United States Navy, and all the other nations prepping for World War II. It experiences a resurgence of interest in the 1960s, I guess if that's what you call urban renewal, and all the great buildings that were destroyed during the 1960s. And then, of course, in the late 1900s, Art Deco remains an enduring and influential design style. Periodic revivals. What periodic revivals? And continued preservation efforts. Well, we can certainly debate that, but that's what the official timeline says. It's intriguing, though, to consider all of these different styles that seem to go into Art Deco. And you could even say that Art Nouveau and Art Deco are interchangeable. There's also the interesting element of Cubism. What's not mentioned, though, as you might recall in our exploration of Buffalo, we saw that there was even an Aztec portion of the Art Deco style. One of the most striking things about the Art Deco structures, though, is the very ornate and detailed interior of structures, which one would certainly expect a lot of time be required to actually complete these buildings, especially when you're laying out the interiors with this kind of wondrous and beautiful detail. Now, a lot of people will simply say, you can't just say something's an old world building because it's beautiful. Well, no, I agree. There's a lot more of complexity in it. We also have to consider the type of material that was used in constructing these buildings. And yet, for some of the more elaborate Art Deco buildings, you'll see that they're stunningly beautiful inside and out. And they also feature elaborate geometric precision. And this is something that we don't have in our modern buildings, or our brutalist architecture buildings. And the explanation will be, well, it's because it was World War II, and then after World War II, we went to brutalist and postmodern, and people wanted to reduce costs. And that's always the explanation that we're given. The other explanation that I tend to hear when we talk about other architectural styles, such as Beaux Arts or Richardsonian Revival, or name whatever you want from the late 1800s, early 1900s that's not Art Deco, is that these were people who were craftsmen. These were masters of their trade, and they passed on this esoteric information and didn't write any of it down. Yet how exactly did all these master builders manage to rapidly learn and understand Art Deco, if it was artistically inspired and it was newly innovated in the 1920s? They certainly didn't pass this down. This was an entirely new style. So how did all these individuals who were into construction learn this style? You can't tell me that an architect went everywhere and rapidly taught all the people who actually did the nugwork of the construction the detailings behind this Art Deco. But yet this is the official explanation that will be given, and we'll also be told that this is yet another lost style that, for reasons of expense, we can't replicate to this day, or because we have all these master craftsmen who are no longer available or lost their trade. You look at an image such as this, though, and you see the futuristic component of Art Deco. Indeed, there's no shortage of fantasy with Art Deco that also blends into the genre called steampunk. And it gives impressions that Art Deco is much more futuristic than we were initially led to believe. And you can find this in actual images, various examples of artwork, and fiction from the time into this day. It gives the impression that there was a greater futuristic component to Art Deco, that maybe it could have been reflecting an older civilization that really was far more advanced. And I recall a joint exploration I did with Old World Exploration where we looked at Art Deco in detail and we saw this futuristic view of it. And it's amazing that it seems to be a disturbing and almost lacking continuity with the timeline of the 1920s. Because how exactly did they go to this? And many of these buildings still stand to this day, and you can go visit them. And we'll be looking at some examples of these buildings, and whether you're in one of the great cities of the United States or anywhere else across the land, you can still find examples of these Art Deco buildings. They're all over the land. And certainly I advise looking at them from the outside and visiting the inside. You can also get an idea of what the layout of these cities may have been with these wondrous examples of Art Deco architecture. The true integration of inspired art in architecture. And of course the reason given World War II and post-World War II up until now is that we simply want to save money. But we have to remember the science fiction component of Art Deco even was reflected in the film Metropolis, which this channel did review in its early days well over a year ago. Metropolis is an intriguing film though because some suggest that perhaps this is a film from an entirely different civilization, although official accounts say it was made in Germany in the mid-1920s by Fritz Lang, and it's considered one of the quintessential and pioneering science fiction movies. Now, it's not the first, but it's certainly the 2001 of its day, if you will. It really inspired the genre. And there's many interesting scenes that almost show things that appear otherworldly. Many of the concepts, this is the first time they were seen on the big screen, such as with synthetic beings, androids, cyborgs, robots, whatever you want to call them. There's also the fact that you have as the main theme within this film, the competition between the use of technology. Technology as a tool and the concept of balance. In fact, the answer to the theme of the film at the end is achieving a balance between the head and the heart, and people not forgetting to actually be human beings and not losing themselves in their technology. There's no shortage of very interesting scenes within this film, things that almost seem otherworldly. To say nothing of the odd-houred clocks, we also have very interesting close-ups and unique effects going on with the eyes. And if you watch this film all the way through, you'll see that it does have a lot of interesting symbolism, not to be confused with symbology, although you'll certainly want to go into symbology after you watch this film to try to understand exactly what it's saying. Unless, of course, somebody realized that Rush was going to publish an album called the 2112 Overture and use some of the symbolism within that album. You again see the advanced architecture and many things reflecting what was potential Art Deco at that time in the 1920s. Again, rivaling anything that we have today. And you might notice it looks a little bit more impressive because we don't see our vast quantity of pencil, glass, and steel skyscrapers. Here we see full structures that seem to be made of what we would think is either advanced concrete, masonry, or something else. And here we have the central headquarters of the city in Metropolis, the new Tower of Babel. So a very interesting series of images and plot lines and many different elements of understanding the society. Again, though, there are some that suggest that this film could have been made from the previous civilization, and there's a reason why it feels almost out of place. Now, there could be other explanations behind it, and I certainly invite you to share those in the comments. Now, what does this all have to do with the Roaring 1920s? This film is considered a reflection of the oddity of the 1920s. And in fact, it had a very disruptive effect on the mind of H.G. Wells, science fiction author, who published War of the Worlds and many other great stories. He decided to produce and really spearhead a film in 1936 called Things to Come, where he had this individual, John Cabal, with a helmet, that dark helmet, not even Darth Vader would be jealous of, who decided that after a worldwide war, Wings Over the World was going to impose its centralized authority and force the world to be unified. And indeed, he believes that technology is the answer to all of life's problems. Oddly enough, this film would seem to predict what would happen in World War II, and here we see John Cabal in his very fancy uniform with his really neat black boots, although he's not wearing his really cool black helmet, looking over at the effects of the gas of peace after they've used it to subdue the town of Everytown, which is supposed to be a stand-in for London. And there's some odd lines in this film: the Freemasonry of science, the fact that Wings Over the World doesn't tolerate free sovereign nations, and by extension individuals. Well, moving on from that, let's look at the mad builders, the achievements of the 1920s. And this is perhaps the most striking thing of the Roaring 1920s. All the incredible construction achievements. So many buildings built in so many different locations. But who were the people who actually did this? Well, let's take a look at some of the images that we have. These are the individuals, and we'll often be told these were the very hard workers. They didn't have the distraction of modern technology, no cell phones, no laptops, no pads, or anything else that we take for granted. They just simply worked very, very hard. Although we also understand the 1920s, we did have rudimentary and early heavy machinery. So how was it these individuals became so skilled with the new application of Art Deco so quickly? This was not some esoteric craft that was passed down and it wasn't written. Somehow, to pull this off, these people who built these buildings had to learn these techniques. And how did they manage to replicate it so quickly? We do have images that show these workers on these buildings as they're building them, and they always seem to be engaging in death-defying stunts, hanging off from ladders and hanging on the very tops of spires of buildings, very nonchalantly. Now, could it be that they simply were that risk-averse, and here we have this individual doing the magic kick in the air, or perhaps he's just trying to reposition himself, as they're hanging from a wire. No safety equipment, and you have no shortage of images such as this, where they're just dangling up this high. And of course the explanation will be, they simply didn't care about their safety. They had to work. If they didn't work, they wouldn't get paid, and they would die. That's what people will say. I always appreciate this image with all these workers just sitting here on this beam, and again, suspended above the city, and if anyone makes the slightest wrong move or loses their balance, they're going to be doing a Wile E. Coyote down to the street below. Now you could say, well, there were no safety standards and nobody really cared about such things. But how exactly do you keep a construction project going if you have 10, 20, 100 workers who've all fallen off the building and died? And then all of a sudden you have the reputation of that going around. Yes, we were trying to build the Empire State Building, but 500 workers have fallen to their death. Indeed, that's a reason given for why the Panama Canal was not completed by the French, because they had so many workers dying from the mosquitoes and the malaria. Nice shoes here. So you see, Christopher Lee wasn't the only one who wore the heeled shoes to do his duel in Three Musketeers. That individual did it to build a building. And you know, what else could they do while they were constructing these buildings in the 1920s? I guess they could also get in a quick 9-holer while they were up on top of the structures. Many strange images that give you many conflicting accounts. But, you know, I suppose it does support the mainstream's argument, because if you have individuals that could so easily do this and operate on building this way, and actually constructing this Art Deco, which we discussed earlier, would be very problematic, because how did they learn all these artistic techniques so quickly? And how did this really disseminate across the entire nation so quickly to where all these skilled workers could pull this off? Here we have this bridge being constructed and everyone just seems to be taking a nonchalant walk. Here we even have a dinner being served. Ah, yes, doesn't this look like a very intriguing image? And we see the skyline in the background. Yes, why not? Just sit down while you're working and have a very fancy dinner. Have a couple individuals that are very well dressed in tuxedos and serve you everything that you need. I don't know if I see any problems with this image, but it's very interesting. I mean, just think, if you're getting that kind of service, then maybe I could understand the mainstream's point and all the people who support it, that yes, they really did build these buildings. I mean, if you can just dangle off the edge of buildings and actually have a fine meal served to you while you're sitting up here suspended above the entire city where one wrong move could send you plummeting to your death, then yes, they really could do anything. Now you do have some, maybe we should say, more modest images mixed in where we have individuals. This individual here appears to be contemplating. Although when you look at the construction timelines on these buildings, you really have to ask, when did they ever have time just to stop working and pose? Because I thought they were working all the time. They had to be working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if they were building buildings in Chicago and New York, they certainly couldn't have stopped with the winter when you had snow. They certainly couldn't have stopped when it was a rainy day. And they really couldn't have stopped when there was the big winds. But as we said, if they could balance themselves so well, it shouldn't have been a problem. You might recall when we explored St. Louis, one of the interesting structures from the 1920s that we looked at, it's not technically Art Deco, but it's an interesting structure nonetheless, is the Civil Courts Building. And one of the things that always fascinated me by the Civil Courts Building, or the Civil Courthouse, they've got a couple different names for it in St. Louis, is just how rapidly they built it. And no, like we said, it's not Art Deco. You could probably consider it more Roman-Greco, or perhaps even before that, because the top of the building, as a couple others are, is modeled after the Mausoleum of Helicanarsis. Although, how we actually know what the Mausoleum of Helicanarsis looks like is beyond me, but, if we said we did it, we said we did it. And it's with that structure that I have one of my absolute favorite construction photos, where we see the top of a column actually being constructed. And here we have the exceptional abilities of the workers once again. Their ability to balance themselves in very unnatural ways. Their ability to continue focusing on the job. I mean, I would certainly be holding on this high above the ground with the top of my foot and not having a good foothold. I don't need it. I'm just that good. Yes, you just have to believe they really built these buildings. And really, if you accept the fact that they were able to build the column like that, with that individual holding on with the top of his foot to nothing, then you don't even need to see the images of how they built these sphinx-like figures at the top of this replication of the Mausoleum of Helicanarsis on the Civil Courts Building. You can just accept it at face value. Why question it? And in Australia and other locations, they had the same thing. Here you have these super workers that are just pulling all these amazing things off and building all these buildings in a very short amount of time. Of course, again, they had time to stop and pose for pictures, but, that seems to be the least questionable element of the story. I mean, the fact that we see them balancing themselves, and the fact that oftentimes the construction of these buildings doesn't seem to match with the actual interiors, there's no reason to really question that. I think we could just simply hand wave that away. Now, how many buildings? So I just wanted to take a quick look at some of the stellar examples of the structures that were completed in the 1920s. There's the Cathedral of Learning, the 42-story skyscraper that's the centerpiece of the University of Pittsburgh. And the mainstream account tells us that they built this in 1926, although they detail it a little further in terms of when they actually laid it out. They commissioned it in 1921, ground was broken in 1926, first class was held in 1931, but they didn't complete it until 1934. So I guess you could hold class in it until it was completed. It's a very stunning structure, and indeed you can look at a lot of the construction photos of it and you'll see that it's just something utterly extraordinary. And it's just one of the many structures that were built in the 1920s. Now, technically, it's not Art Deco. Although what's really intriguing is when you look at the construction photos of it, is how the construction photos don't really line up with the interior, especially when you look at the actual interior of the main auditorium or any of the commons rooms, where you see something that looks like a giant cathedral. So that's one example. We also look at the Detroit Masonic Temple. We go to Detroit. And here in Detroit, Michigan, with the Masonic Temple, we're informed that they broke ground on this in 1920 and completed this stunning palace by 1926. And if you want to see more detail on this, go look at the Detroit exploration on this channel. I'll link these explorations in the description. Then there's the Guardian Building, and this is a bona fide Art Deco building and another one of the one-year wonders, also built in Detroit. A very impressive structure, and of course it has the hallmark of the very impressive interior of the Art Deco building. At the same time, we also have the Fisher Building, built in Detroit, and this is one of those structures that basically takes up an entire block. And this one was completed in 1 year, another one-year wonder, and you can certainly reference this. So a couple Art Deco buildings, the Great Detroit Masonic Temple, and then of course the Cathedral of Learning. Now we're just looking at a few examples. Now, here, let's take a look at all the buildings in Chicago that were built in the 1920s. Now, if you want to go to the Chicago Towers exploration, you can look at many of these. And we see there's no shortage of buildings that were rapidly constructed in Chicago. We have the Chicago Women's Club, we have the Chicago Temple, we have Soldier Field, which we explored in the Fields and very interesting stadium exploration. We have Union Station, Willoughby Tower. Basically, it seems like they built most of Chicago in the 1920s. Matter Tower, so very impressive. All these structures built in a very short amount of time. Oh, and at least I overlooked the Union Station from the 1920s too. So impressive. What other examples do we have? Well, let's take a look at Manhattan in New York City. And here we have the Gray Bar Building, built in 2 years, impressive Art Deco. We have the Fred French Building, built in a year. We have 2 Park Avenue, built in 2 years. We have the Chanin Building, or the Chanin Building, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. The Fuller Building, another one-year wonder, very impressive. The Master Building, a one-year wonder. Hotel Lexington, another one-year wonder. The Chrysler Building, which we looked at and we're very familiar with. Salvation Army and National Headquarters, another one-year wonder. The Downtown Athletic Club. The Empire State Building. It actually took them 2 years on that, and we've explored that in the New York Exploration. General Electric Building, 2 years. We've explored that. And so many, many others. Now, yes, I know you'll say it's New York City, but isn't it intriguing to look at all these buildings that were built in a very short amount of time? And of course, we go to St. Louis and we have the Southwestern Bell Building, built in 1926, and of course the Civil Courts Building, where we had that death-defying construction worker who could balance himself on the top of his foot while he's constructing a column, because it all makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Now, what exactly are they building in Chicago today? Because remember, people like to say that the 2020s matches the 1920s. Well, these are the kind of buildings that we plan and build to this day. Ah yes, 2 skyscrapers, glass and steel. And somehow they're not going to complete these in a year, which is rather odd. I thought technology has come a long way. But the first tower is due to open in 2027, and they're going to break ground this year, or so they say. So I guess we'll have to track this in real time and see what kind of progress they make. Will it actually take them 3 years? And I have a question for you. If they actually finish it in a single year, or less, do you think that this structure matches any of these incredible structures that we've looked at from Chicago's roaring 1920s period? Maybe you do, and that's completely okay. And, of course, the example we can look at in New York City is the One World Trade Center. Now, granted, this is the tallest building now in North America. I recognize this, and has been since it was completed in 2013. It took them 7 years to put this building up. And, of course, you can see it's another one of these incredible glass and steel skyscrapers. And, its height should be credited, of course. And when we look at the interior, yes, I don't know what it is. I mean, it's a very functional interior, and if it's your style, it's your style. I'm not going to castigate you for it. It's rather intriguing to me, though, that they put it right above the Empire State Building. And if you actually go in the Empire State Building, you'll see a slightly different interior. So what's really the explanation behind the roaring 1920s? Is it possible that the reset occurred in the 1920s? Or even right before the 1920s, and that's why we have these Art Deco buildings? While we had World War II and all of a sudden this style stopped? That's one possible explanation, and we've certainly explored that. Another explanation may be that it's evidence of an alternate timeline, or even an alternate reality, where suddenly we had the capability of these buildings. Of course, I do always consider the mainstream theory. It is possible, or perhaps I should say the mainstream account, that this happened as we're told, although it seems unlikely. By the way, what do you feel is the best Art Deco building? And if you're a longtime viewer of the channel, do you know what I consider the best Art Deco building in the land to be? Yes, it's a matter of opinion, but let me know. Well, thank you for joining me. Be sure to join us for live stream this Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you. Interesting. The Civil War was always really darned interesting for a variety of reasons. Not the least of which is I can remember how the American perception of the Civil War changed a lot. The United States goes back and forth on how it views the Civil War. Oh, there you go, RB. I wish something would happen. I was promised aliens. I got boredom. Well, there's always next year, RB. So, anyways. What's intriguing about the United States Civil War, and I'll just tell you from my perspective, when I was growing up, there was a very unique perspective about the United States Civil War. And you can actually go back and watch films and TV shows from the 1970s. I'll name 2. There's The Outlaw Josie Wales with Clint Eastwood. How exactly was the Southern side or the Confederate side depicted in that movie? Well, you could argue it was depicted more, dare I say, sympathetically. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying that's what official history says. I'm just talking about a movie that was made in the 1970s that was a little more sympathetic to it. And then, of course, our other favorite film, or excuse me, our other favorite TV show that I like to refer to, Little House on the Prairie, where we actually had Jesse James, who made an appearance on Little House on the Prairie, and he was depicted very sympathetically. Now, of course, it was before he met his demise in Northfield in Minnesota, of all places, but very, very intriguing. Texas redneck hippie. Merrimack, or what is in his hand. So this is Swedish inventor John Ericsson. And that's not the Merrimack, that's the Monitor that he has. That was the ship that he designed and built from the ground up. It was not built on an existing ship. The Merrimack was the existing ship the Confederates captured when they captured Norfolk. How exactly they captured those federal facilities, who knows? Can you imagine somebody capturing federal facilities today? That would never happen in a million years. But apparently it was possible. You know, it was the early 1860s. A civil war was brewing, and because James Buchanan didn't take any steps to prepare the United States for civil war, he was considered a bad president. But then they got Abraham Lincoln in there, and he was ready to go. But anyway, the Confederates captured the Merrimack. They repurposed it, turned it into an ironclad, came up with the revolutionary idea of building an iron ship. And so the Union, in 90 days, hired this Swedish inventor, John Ericsson, and just out of his fourth point of contact, he contrived this incredible ship, the Monitor. Now, I'm showing this because this is one of his monuments that's rather interesting, you know, and you can see that it's very clearly a statue that we'd build. What's this interesting symbol that he's got over here on his jacket? Not exactly sure. But what's the historiosity of John Ericsson? Well, he's a historical figure, and official history will tell you that, yes, he existed, and yes, he invented the Monitor with the revolving turret, a feature that's still used on naval ships to this day, and also used on the Venerable tank. John Ericsson had many other inventions under his belt, though, steam engines, and of course, the USS Princeton. Yet, when you look at these actual monuments that are dedicated to John Ericsson, what exactly do these symbols or these individuals have to do with John Ericsson? And that's what I'm asking and wondering, because this is something that we see all the time. Mother Shipton's prophecy. Yes, Jamie. Yes. Well, that's always a good question. Who does really control America? The people do. That's the official answer. It's a republic with representatives. And people are very happy with those representatives in America right now, because they're supposed to be happy with the representatives, right? So anyway, but let me remove the banner here, because what you really have is, this is his monument, but there's nothing here that has anything to do with him. I mean, this almost looks like it's a monument to the Battle of Entry, I would say. I mean, I could make that argument. It would make more sense. I mean, what was John Ericsson in his bodybuilding phase before he invented the Monitor, and this was supposed to be dedicated to him? I know it's supposed to be some sort of strange artistic license that's being taken. It's representative. It's an analogy. It's allegory. Of course, it always is. And here you can see, yes, the other part of this monument. And they do actually have old John sitting down here, and here's his name. But it's really, really odd how it looks like there's different parts of this monument. Now, maybe I'm just seeing things. Maybe you want to disagree with me, and that's completely okay. Maybe it is all John Ericsson's monument. And we always liked doing these, how shall we say, very scantily clad figures that aren't really wearing a lot of clothing on all these Civil War monuments. Yes, of course, I'm referring to the Iowa Soldiers and Sailors Monument, where we have the, rather naked lady who represents Iowa. And keep in mind, these statues and these monuments were built during a time when there officially wasn't a lot of public tolerance. So I guess it's different if you make a statue. Maybe so. I guess we'll see what happens to this live stream. You know, I'm being facetious, but I'm also being a little serious. Jackie right there. Repurposed statues. Yes, quite possible. Repurposed and altered statues. And there is a lot of symbolism in all of them. Although what symbolism actually applies? It's like, I didn't know the griffin was a national symbol of the United States. No one will tell you that today, or was it a symbol of Iowa? Was it a symbol of John Ericsson? Who knows? RB, was it not cold back then? Yeah, I thought so. I mean, why else would they wear all those wool uniforms and so much more in different battles? So anyway, that's what we have with John Ericsson. And then here's another view of the very interesting monument. I mean, you would think, and look, I'm not an artist. You know, I did a little poetry back in the day, but I'm not an artist. But wouldn't you think that they would put John Ericsson actually standing on the statue and not sitting below it? Or, I mean, it's really strange. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me with the positioning. And even the wording on it just seems to be a little off. So I'm not really sure. It's just one of many examples. But then there's also the fact, going back to the United States Civil War, that we had the very first submarines, the USS Alligator, which was one of the first operational submarines. Now, of course, people remember the CSS Hunley, which was a Confederate ship that attempted an attack on a U.S. or a United States Navy ship. I think it was the Houstonianic. And then we all also remember the legendary turtle from the Revolutionary War. And yeah, I think that's a little bit legendary. And Brian here with a great comment, Jules Verne, yes. So during the United States Civil War, it's well documented that they innovated ships with turrets. They had steam-driven ships before the Civil War, but this was the first wartime application. And there was even a submarine. Submarines used in combat, no less. That's what the official history says. So it's just another one of those interesting things. Did they actually have all those technological innovations? Or are we seeing accounts of technology that was located and salvaged? I mean, ultimately, that's going to be your point to make and your decision to make. But we have all these photos of these cities that are just utterly destroyed. And we've explored these cities in our explorations in the past, and especially in the United States, Chicago, Boston. It wasn't just the cities in the South that got destroyed, Atlanta, Charleston, but there's no shortage of it, where we see this kind of utter and total destruction. Destruction that we would expect to see with World War II, with the carpet bombing that occurred, the very necessary strategic carpet bombing that occurred. At least we were assured it was very necessary, but you're trying to win a war. But yet we could see this kind of destruction from fires, from cannonballs in the Civil War, from the Great City Fires. Now, going back to that old concept of the 5 Ws, were these really separate events, or were these the same event? Or had somebody founded or salvaged some technology and they were testing it out? Maybe they didn't have any idea what it would actually do. Maybe it only worked one time. How do we exactly know? Jamie Griffin here. Verne supposedly met Nemo when he was a lad. It's very, very interesting, too, how Captain Nemo is a bit of an analogy character, if you will. There's also, if you've ever watched Master of the World with Vincent Price from the 1960s, that's kind of a Nemo character. And then, of course, there's our favorite character from Discordia, who wears a Freddy Krueger sweater. No, I'm not kidding. The guy actually wore a sweater just like Freddy Krueger long before Robert Englund ever played Freddy Krueger. I wish I were making it up, but I'm not. It's just one of those things that's really, really crazy. But we have all this going on with this event. Is this a cycle? Is it a reset cycle? And then we have a new era. Maybe things can get better, but a lot of times they just tend to degenerate for a variety of reasons. We can't build like we used to. We can't maintain the infrastructure like we used to. All we can do is salvage and recover what came before and try to press it back in service and use it as long as we can. And is it possible that as the eras have gone on, we've simply degenerated? Our ability to build and maintain has declined over time. And that's really, is that the fate of the world? Are we just going to continue this decline? So yes, we have cycles. There's going to be another reset. Whether you think of a reset as a day-to-day event or you think of it as something else, it's another one of those hard decisions that you have to make. Now, I'm not someone who's preaching doom and gloom, but if we go off of what's come in the past, there's a lot of evidence that yes, things have continued to diminish. Have our life forces continued to diminish? That's arguable. Have our actual lifespans continued to diminish? Well, if you go off the Bible and take it literally, or any other number of religious texts, they say that human beings used to live much longer. Not a paltry 70 to 100 years, but hundreds of years, some even over 1,000. Is that just a myth? Oh, yeah, it's just a myth. Although if you actually try to do the math, looking at a lot of those original texts, it only works if you accept the fact that what they say for the age of those people was true. How old did Noah live to be? Was Noah a historical figure, or was that just a name assigned to some other figure? So, Battlestar Utarian, it sure feels like a day-to-day these days. Yeah, I'm with you. It does feel like there's a lot of different little events that occur. Charles, no more resets. Judgment, entirely possible. We just don't know. Is it a cycle? But we have new events that are happening. So this is just one of the theories. And again, this is all theoretical. You decide what you're going to believe. But it is interesting to see that we have all this remaining architecture, and you go to a place like Chicago and you'll see it in different places. You'll see this kind of destruction. I mean, without even telling you the name of the city, could this be any city in World War II that was subjected to devastating destruction? I mean, we just explored Volgograd this last week, formerly known as Stalingrad. That was a city that was bombed. It was also a city that had the largest land battle officially in the history of warfare that occurred in it. And so very, very destructive. Or is this Chicago? Or is this something else? Could it be any of these cities that's just completely leveled? And so if this is all you have, then what are you left with doing? Cody, yeah, that was called the Alamo. Yeah, maybe the Alamo is something along those lines too. Get down to San Antonio at some point in time. I need to get back to Texas. Thanks for reminding me. But you also have other images like this. I mean, is this a photograph? Is this a drawing? Is this a combination photograph and drawing? Because when you look closely at this, I'm not really sure. Now, the official explanation will be this was taken from a print in a book, and so maybe that's why these individuals look like drawn figures. I don't know. What exactly is going on in this image? It seems like there's a lot of panic. Is there a fire going on, or is there something else? Is there a fire sale going on? I'm not really sure because, I mean, why would you bring your horse and cart up there unless you're trying to get something out of there? It looks like the flood of the ages is coming and someone's really concerned. Or maybe there is some sort of fire that's rapidly approaching this structure. But what really to make of this image? And here's the thing. Without assigning context, in other words, a meaning or the 5 W's, it becomes a lot more interesting. Because if you don't know what happened with this image and you're just seeing it for the first time, would it not be possible that anybody, I'm not saying I would ever do this, but anybody could come up with a 5W explanation? So who is this? These are Americans. What is this? They are abandoning the city because they were told a massive fire was coming. When did this happen? 1871. Now, what if somebody else said, these aren't Americans, these are British, and this is a facility in Liverpool, and they're abandoning this facility in 1892 because they were told that there was going to be a big riot and civil disobedience was going to occur, or something along those lines. The point I'm getting at is anybody can really say anything, and if you don't know the context, if you didn't actually witness the event, then an image can become associated with anything, can it not? Oh, there's a good one from Cody. Yeah, I mean, maybe so. And that's just it, Corky. Is it a photo? I mean, it's taken from a book. What do we know? Who actually has the original negatives, and how much can we trust the original negatives? All interesting questions. How much of Chicago actually went up in quote unquote smoke in that fire? And what was that great fire really about? Why do we have great fires up in Peshtigo in Wisconsin, essentially on the same line of longitude? You're just at a different latitude. You went north a little bit. Peshtigo, around where Green Bay is. Ah, that's why the Packers have always been the independent football team, right? Sorry to throw in one football joke. But this is supposedly an image that shows you the fire destruction that occurred in Chicago, the Great Fire. And, it doesn't look like it was that much of the city. Sure, the downtown, look how well laid out Chicago already was in 1871. Very, very impressive. Lots of build out in just a very short amount of time. I'll tell you what, those people in the 1800s, they could accomplish anything, especially people who came to America. I mean, why isn't Europe Ecumenopolis? Why isn't Europe completely covered with a city if they could build things this fast? And not to mention, if the population would grow this fast. Remember, the official population of the United States increased by over 1,000%. Actually, it was a lot more than that from 1800 to 1900. In some cities, we've got tens of thousands of percentage of population growth. No, it doesn't make sense. You can't really justify it. But what actually happened in Chicago? Well, look, this isn't actually a photo. This is just a painting. So dramatic license. Yes, it looks like most of the city's going up in smoke. And of course, we're well aware of the tales that we have of the cow kicking over the lamp or whatever we had. And then we've even got some other accounts that say meteors. If you ride that, oh, there's a good one from Jamie. Yeah, the 451 Fireman, Fahrenheit 451. Great book. I strongly suggest reading it if you haven't. So, Robert with a good call out there. Yeah, the city grids never really made a lot of sense. Washington is one that keeps me up at night still to this day. So, anyway, but what actually happened? Were these all events that occurred at the same time? What exactly is this over here? Oh, very interesting. I guess it's a circular field near Chicago. It's not a missile silo, obviously. Oh, look at that. Oh no, the roundhouse is going up in smoke, or maybe it's going to survive. Yeah, we clearly have the roundhouse right there, right next to the river. I guess it makes perfect sense. Where's Jackson Park? I'm not really sure. But it's just another one of those paintings that causes you to question things. And there's all sorts of dramatic paintings of Chicago and many of the other cities and what actually happened. Were they different events that happened at different times, or were they showing the exact same event? And whether we're in Boston, yeah, I'll admit I watched that movie The Departed recently, so it's still on my mind. But what are you going to do about it? Oh, there you go, Cody. Someone smoked a cigarette wrong. My favorite is, I think it was Tomlinson Hall in Indianapolis, where we had the pigeon that dropped the cigarette butt, and that's what sent Tomlinson Hall up in smoke. Yeah, a pigeon dropping a cigarette butt. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Yeah, Daryl, Poor White City. I remember when they were going to do a television adaptation of Devil in the White City, but for some reason that didn't come to fruition. I can't imagine why. Thanks for making that comment. Yeah, I forgot about that. Anyways, but it's not just there. What about London? Well, the fire in London occurred in 1666, right? Did it? Maybe. And how much of London went up in smoke? And of course, we can trace the development of St. Paul. Hey, check out the bridge. Wow, castles on the bridge, lots of arches. How the heck did they get that up in 1666? I know it was in Europe. They had a lot of time. There were a lot of artisans and craftsmen. But if they could build a whole nation where no nation existed and numerous cities and populate it, then again, I'm asking, why the heck wasn't all of Europe covered in a continuous city? I mean, shouldn't have been, and covered in people. I know there was the bubonic plague. That's how we explain it. How did this fire start in London in 1666? I know, I watched that episode of Doctor Who, The Visitation. It was the pteroleptals. Yes, yes, yes. But on an honest note, though, are these separate events? I mean, what the heck? Oh, never mind. But it's still laid out like a bird's eye view map. And so all these different fires showing all this city destruction. Now, does anybody know what kind of cloud this is? There's a very definitive name for this kind of cloud. And I'm always about highlighting this because this sort of cloud is, well, let's just say it's made an appearance a couple times over the past couple years. Yeah, metaphorical. I do wonder about it, though. But has anybody seen this kind of cloud? Because it oftentimes gets mistaken for another kind of cloud. I'm not going to say which kind of cloud because, it's not something I should probably be saying. I mean, you're smart people. You've seen it before. But does anybody know what the official name for this cloud is? Hey, Jackie. Welcome and thanks for joining in. Oh, it's definitely a fire, but there's a funky name for it. No, you're close. You're close. Technically, this is called a pyrocumulus cloud. And there's a big how to do. Here's a better image of the pyrocumulus cloud. There's a big how to do about how after, let me be very, very clear on this, and I'm not going to show the image. You can look it up on your own. But how after the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, the city was on fire and it produced a pyrocumulus cloud. And there's a photo of it, taken from the air, of course. And that photo is not to be mistaken for the mushroom cloud of the atomic weapon that was used on it. So yes, there's obviously a little bit of confusion. I can't imagine why. But you see these pyrocumulus clouds when you have large fires that burn out of control. And yet they strangely look similar to another type of cloud. I'm sure that's just a coincidence, but it's another one of those fascinating things. Now just think, we do have these historical accounts of all these city fires. Now, granted, the historical account says that all the city fires occurred at different times. The Chicago fire didn't happen the same time as the Boston fire. It did happen the same time as the Peshtigo fire, but that was up in Wisconsin. It wasn't a city fire. So different event, same event, I don't know. But interesting to think, if you had all of these cities on fire at the same time and vast portions of the land, then what kind of massive pyrocumulus clouds would you have had all over the land at the time? Was that reflecting something else? And that's what I've always really wondered about that. Is there a reason why these images have such a profound psychological effect on us? Why, when we see a quote unquote pyrocumulus cloud, it kind of taps that little bit of the fear response in the back of the mind? I'm not really sure. And yeah, here you can see exactly how a pyrocumulus cloud is formed. Smoke carried up into the stratosphere, hot air condenses and clouds form, superheated updrafts. by vast portions of the land, the city, whatever being on fire. Yes, very well documented science right here. Kitsch, cumulus. And there's all kinds of interesting cloud effects, aren't there? Yeah, Michael says that very well. A primal fear. And it does really affect people. And if you want to see how fear can affect people, just go back and look at the fallout, you'll excuse the pun, to the British nuclear war excuse me, the British nuclear war documentary film called Threads. And it's actually called Threads Fallout. You can watch it on YouTube. And pay attention to what the old Vice Air Marshal says. It's very, very interesting. I've alluded to it a couple times. It's obviously okay to talk about because it was a full documentary. So I can't imagine anybody being in trouble for it. But it's really interesting seeing how people were affected by the fear of what was shown in that movie. And then here's just another little bit of a diagram. These diagrams are very, very helpful, aren't they? Now, going back to something a little bit more down to earth. All over, we have the remnants of these incredible municipal buildings, these county courthouses. And this is one, of course, from the state that I do a lot of explorations in because it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me why they have so many incredible structures like this. And of course, it's in the state of Iowa. And why does Iowa interest me so much? Because there's actually a lot of hidden gems in Iowa. And we'll get to which county courthouse this is. This is the Davis County Courthouse in Bloomfield, Iowa, a very modest-sized town. And so at any point in its history, let's just go to today. It's 2025, and the town of Bloomfield, Iowa, in Davis County wants to build a new courthouse. Do you think anybody, anywhere in Iowa, could build a courthouse like this today? I always ask this question, and it's a very serious question. Because, yes, of course, this courthouse is dated to the distant past. We'll get to it in a second. But I'm just asking you, without any sort of preconceived notions, do you think anybody could build this courthouse today? Hey, Corky can build it. Awesome, Corky. Get us the plans and get it up. I want to have a courthouse in my backyard. Definitely, it's written they were. There you go, Eric. You're on top of it. You're absolutely right. It wouldn't be written down if it wasn't true, right? Anybody remember that? Yeah, billion? Yeah, that's about right. I don't think you can do it with a trillion. I was going to make a really bad joke there, but I'm going to hold my tongue. Kathy, no way. Michael says, yes, if you wrote it down, right? Maybe you think it can be done. Maybe you believe somewhere, some way, somebody could do it. But I will tell you, you're not going to see it anytime soon. Anyways. Oh, yeah, and of course, there's images of scaffolding around it because you know how it goes with these old world buildings. I mean, these old courthouses, they're just rickety buildings that they constantly have to do repair work to keep them afloat or keep them up. So the official account says. Now, let's look at our historical marker here. Or actually, before we do, I want to consider something else. So looking at the state of Iowa, does anybody know where the original capital, the state capital in Iowa was? And by the way, it wasn't a state capital, it was a territorial capital. You might be surprised. Yeah, well, you know, there's always renovations going on, Michael. So, yeah, renovation equals destruction. Or it even, I could dare say, it equals concealment too, Jamie. But yeah, absolutely. We're not able to really see it. Anyway, a little peculiarity about Iowa. The very first capital was a territorial capital in the town of Burlington, way down here. And by the way, Burlington was also the territorial capital of Wisconsin. How the heck does that make any sense? Don't ask me. The next state capital, once it was a state, was in Iowa City. And that was in the 1840s. And then by the late 1860s, they moved it to the west in Des Moines. So keep that in mind, about 30 years, 3 different capitals. And of course, we remember that story. I mean, the historical account that, you know, I'm not saying it's a story, but, you know, it tells us a good story of how they built the state capital in Iowa because they had refunds from the Civil War. How the hell they got refunds from the federal government, I don't know. Remember, there was no income tax. Yes, there was income tax during the Civil War, but then it was only for the more wealthy of citizens. So, you know, the entire population wasn't paying an income tax. It certainly wasn't World War II yet, as we looked at in the Reset Barons. But look at that. 3 different state capitals. Well, territorial capital in Burlington, one in Iowa City, and then over in Des Moines in a short 30-year period, 3 decades. How incredible. What amazing development. Now, how many times has the United States Capitol moved? And where has it moved? Well, originally it was in Philadelphia, and then there were a couple temporary locations, and then officially it was in Washington, D.C., which is where it's been for the most amount of time. Now, I recall, and I'm going to date myself here, and that's okay. During the Cold War, there was a lot of concern. Okay, we're going off official history here, the official account, that the Soviet Union, with their nuclear submarines, boomers as they called them, could launch intercontinental ballistic missiles, or they could launch submersible launch ballistic missiles, SLBMs, what we call the Polaris from the US boomers, that they could strike Washington, D.C., and they'd only have about 6 minutes from launch to detonation, maybe even less. And so the discussion was, well, why don't we move the national capital inland where there'd be a little bit more time? Maybe, I don't know, somewhere like Nebraska, Kansas. Yeah, could you imagine moving the national capital there, like Omaha? Coincidentally, the Strategic Air Command base off it is near Omaha, but they never moved the national capital. All I'm getting at here is that the state of Iowa moved its state capital 3 times in 30 years. How many times has the United States moved its national capital in going on 250 years? It's just a consideration. That's all I'm saying. I mean, why didn't they move the capital? For that fact, why didn't they build another capital city out of Hyde? Oh, no. We built Washington out of nothing. We did it when the nation was new, when we didn't really have a lot of money, officially. And by the way, this was the 1800s. And even though we were under a capitalist economy then, officially, we didn't have the ability to, how shall we say, go into great debt to achieve these projects. That wasn't an innovation until the 1900s, again, according to official history. It's just one of those things I found very, very fascinating. Well, I mean, why would you want to move the capital from Washington, D.C.? It's very, very beautiful. The National Mall is there. Who in their right mind would want to move it? It's tradition. I mean, you can justify the movement of the state capital of Iowa because, well, it was a new state. No one has really settled on it being anywhere. Anyway, going back to the War of 1812, another one of those interesting conflicts, recall that Washington, D.C. was burned by the British. Keep in mind that many Americans felt that the United States won that war. It was a perception. It was technically a draw because of the Great Battle of New Orleans that Andrew Jackson won against the British, a battle that occurred after the Treaty of Ghent was signed, so called to the official history. But a very, very interesting conflict, one in which there was a lot of, how shall we say, incompetence, especially on the side of the United States military. Even though, according to official history, the United States had already participated in the Northwest Indian War, occurred 1791 to 1794, and had learned that they needed a regular army. Then I guess they forgot that lesson because then they didn't have a regular army to invade Canada. And that's why they never really successfully invaded Canada. They were repulsed numerous times. There was a raid that burned York, and that's where they killed Tecumseh. But that was what the raid on Washington, D.C. was in response to, apparently. Really strange conflict, the War of 1812. Yeah, the United States didn't exactly come out so well in that. Remember, the White House was burned. So, they had to repaint it, and that's why it's the White House. Sure. But just another one of those strange little conflicts. And keep in mind that while that was going on, the Napoleonic Wars were going on too. Very, very interesting. And why wouldn't the capital of the United States have been moved? Here you're seeing in this little diagram, the original United States and then the Louisiana Purchase to start the 1800s. So you would think that the national capital would have been moved further to the west. I don't know, maybe someplace like what is today Frankfort, Kentucky. I'm just throwing names out there and geographical locations. But they always left the capital on the East Coast. There was never any desire to move it to the West. Not in the 1800s, not in the 1900s, not during that scary, frightening time of the Cold War. Whether it was bombers coming from another continent or intercontinental ballistic missiles coming from another continent, or the ones coming from below the ocean. It's just very interesting to me. Now, going back to that Davis County courthouse we looked at, yes, of course, they have one of these little plaques that say, built in 1877 at a cost of $45,000. Yes. And then they talk about who was involved, the architect. Why do these architects always have initials? E. Townsend Mix. T.J. Tolan. T.J. Tolan. I don't know. Sounds like a cop, like T.J. Hooker. T.J. Tolan. Okay, I'll stop right there. But yep, historical place, what they could build in Davis County in Iowa in 1877. Yeah, could you do it today? Well, of course we can't do it today. We don't have the artisan and craftsman. And there you have it. So... I am Kairos. Wasn't there an amazing earthquake in 1812? Yeah, it was about that time frame, and good to see you, I am Kairos. It came a couple years later, and the New Madrid fault line was active, and they say that the Mississippi River ran backwards. I recall exploring that in the great 1800s events. So anyway, trying to reconcile all this interesting history that we have, but going back to the concept of cycles and new events. And that's what we seem to have here. Now, I just thought I'd showcase this. This is a incredible house in the lovely city of Los Angeles that's available for sale for $17.75 million. Now, granted, this picture is a couple years old. It's probably north of 20 mil now. What a lovely, great house and a great example of fifth era architecture. And I just thought it'd be interesting to showcase this. Now, I used to compare this to the courthouse, because this is what we do now in the 21st century. But I actually thought I'd pull another house from Iowa. And, this is a very, very intriguing house in Benton County, Iowa, of all places. And it's called the W.C. Ellis House. And it's in the small town of Vinton, Iowa, a town today of only a couple thousand people. Although, strangely enough, it started off with 2,000 people. It's in between Cedar Rapids and Waterloo. And this was built in 1893 for a gentleman named W.C. Ellis, who officially was the vice president of Farmers National Bank of Vinton, and he was the president of the Vinton Savings Bank. And he was also the vice president of the Iowa Canning Company. Funny, he was not actually an owner. It just says he was the vice president, but somehow he had all this money. So I guess if you're a banker and a vice president, you have a lot of money. But anyway, it was the largest corn canning establishment in the world, because apparently a lot of people needed to be fed in the 1890s. No different than today. And so he had all this money. And because he had all this money, he decided to build this incredible structure in the very small town of Vinton, Iowa. And thank you very, very much for that, New West Reset. And it's great to see you. And by the way, I've got a little commemoration and call out for both you and Old World Exploration coming this week, because I'm finally hitting Canada for some exploration. So look out for that. But yes, these very, very interesting houses. And this is considered a mansion in the very small town of Vinton, Iowa. Yeah, I suppose. Why not? Oh, yeah, it wouldn't be a mansion unless I showed you the interior, right? And here it is, still laid out. Oh, I like how they have exit above the doors there. But yes, this is what you could build in Iowa in 1892. And, compare and contrast that with what costs you $17 million. I'll just go on the low side in Los Angeles today. Yes, I know. Los Angeles, Iowa, there's no comparison, right? Everybody wants to live in Los Angeles. There's no issues there. There's no concerns about living in California. Who in the heck would want to live in Iowa? Well, on that note, why would somebody with all that money in the 1800s want to live in the small town of Vinton and actually want to build a house like this? Now, I'm not even going to ask you the question if we think anybody can build a house like this today. But let me ask you, which one would you want to live in? And again, that's a rhetorical question. But that all comes back to the whole concept of cycles. Was this really something that was just built for a very well-off person? Or was this the kind of house that many more people in the population had? Who knows for sure? It's very, very suspicious to me, and Jamie says it very nicely. It's suspicious to me that these incredible houses are located in small towns, because the official history really doesn't support that. It would make a heck of a lot more sense if Mr. Ellis decided to build his house in even Cedar Rapids or Waterloo at that time. By the way, there's a very interesting history with Waterloo in Iowa with the Maybach manufacturing plant. The car that, strangely enough, looked a lot like a Model T, but that company went out of business. Then Ford went into business and produced the Model T, even though the, dare I say, variant earlier version of the Model T was actually a car that was made in Iowa in the early 1900s. It's that same model that you see driving up the steps of the Iowa State Capitol. Anyways, so moving on past cycles and new events, let's talk about the end of the world. Is there actually going to be an end of the world that's going to come? Should we consider it? Should we be worried about it? Well, let's talk about it. And as always, I've got a little bit of a film reference that I'm going to show, and I hope you don't mind. And it's probably one of the films where I first thought about the end of the world, and it's even stated in the film that it's the end of the world. And that's Beneath the Planet of the Apes, the sequel to the original Planet of the Apes. A very, very interesting film that showed a lot of different reset concepts in it. And here we got James Franciscus with the mutants, the survivor of the post-atomic horror, or whatever they called it then. Very, very interesting sets. And you should look up the history of the screenwriter who wrote Beneath the Planet of the Apes. Now, officially, Beneath the Planet of the Apes was the idea of the original film star Charlton Heston. He did not want to star in infinite sequels, and so he only agreed to appear in the ending of the film. So they got actor James Franciscus to kind of be I don't want to say a Charlton Heston stand-in because that's kind of insulting to James Franciscus, but the way they treated his character in this film, he was kind of a stand-in for Colonel George Taylor, Charlton Heston's character. It really doesn't help that there's a one-on-one fight between the two of them, and Charlton Heston really got the better of him, at least in my opinion. But anyway, that was the whole point behind the film. Now, what's really, really interesting in the Planet of the Apes films is it's an analogy. It's an allegory for how humans developed. When you watch the film, you think, apes don't kill apes. That's what they say. But as the films go on, you see that the apes actually develop the same kind of inclinations that bring humans apart. There's division, there's hatred, there's the desire to destroy. And by the fifth and final film, even though the budget had been decreased, Battle of the Planet of the Apes, this theme had played out. But you actually see the start of this theme really come to play in the second film, Beneath the Planet of the Apes. And so it's again giving that whole concept, it's leading right to the end of the world because nobody can break the cycle in time. I love you, Dr. Zaius. Yes, this is the scene right before Colonel Taylor triggers the Alpha Omega bomb and destroys the entire land, the planet, whatever you want to think of it as. Yes, that whole concept of a weapon being so powerful it could destroy the entire land. The Alpha Omega bomb, the actual doomsday weapon. Hey, look at that. Nice organ that it's in front of, and even some old world architecture. I can think of some other former explorers who were a little bit fooled by that and thought, well, that's really the sign that there was no previous advanced civilization because, I just saw some footage in St. Patrick's and it convinced me it didn't really happen. I am not of that mindset, and everybody's entitled to their opinion. I'm just telling you mine. But very, very interesting that in this film, what you see is instead of the apes actually being a better civilization than humanity, they actually fall to the same vices that humanity has. There's social division, they hate one another, and ultimately they hate themselves. And they go on an aggressive war of conquest, invading these mutated human city and what was left of New York City, and ultimately leading to destruction. The end of the world, so to speak. But I always thought it was very well covered in this movie in these very, very powerful ideas. That's a good one, Adam's Bridge. I'm going to be exploring that one too, Charles. Thanks for bringing that up. So, and some people would say Ragnarok is coming soon, and that's what it's a reference to. RB, Metropolis and Planet of the Apes, same universe. That's a very, very interesting concept, RB. I'd never really thought of that, but you make a good point there. There's a lot of consistency between the two of them. Coincidental? Or, maybe from a similar account? I don't know for sure. This is always very intriguing to me. So they had this really weird scene in Beneath the Planet of the Apes where the mutated humans are praying to the bomb because they think of their bomb as a deity. And this is what they say. The heavens declared the glory of the bomb, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. How interesting. Glory of the bomb in the firmament. Glory be to the bomb and to the holy fallout, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be. World without end. Amen. And then, of course, you know what happens when you detonate this thing. Yeah, it ends that cycle, doesn't it? What interesting lines, though. And like I said, if you're really curious about this and the origins of where these ideas came from, do the hard research on the screenwriter of Beneath the Planet of the Apes. Look at that gentleman's background and see what's actually written into these words. I mean, you can read it for yourself. Firmament. Do I really have to spell it out for you? No, I don't think I do. Now, we do end of the world movies now and have in this century. And, I'll just highlight this one, Leave the World Behind. I'm going to admit I didn't particularly enjoy this movie so much. I just want to let you know we still do end of the world movies to this day. And yeah, there were just some things about this movie that disappointed me. I mean, the ideas in the intro were very interesting, but the middle act of it kind of lost its focus. And then I'm just going to admit the ending really, really disappointed me. And I'll just be honest with all of you. There was a time when I used to love the Rembrandts. I really liked that band, but this movie kind of spoiled it for me. So anyway, so that's another theory. Now let's go to one of my greatest fears. No, not the end of the world, but the infinite recursion time loop. Okay, let's get this off of here. And let's take a look at some of the images from Time Loop. Now, of course, I'm going to reference Star Trek The Next Generation because they've actually got one of the best indications of a time loop. That's relatively simple. Now, does anybody know what specific episode of Star Trek The Next Generation this image is from? Let me make sure I go full image on that one. And if you know the name of the episode right off the bat, you're a better fan than I am, because I actually had to look it up. It's been a while. That's a good one. Go to bed, old man. You have no idea, Sonny Kim. You have no idea, really. Well, thanks, Corky. I really appreciate that. So this is from the Star Trek The Next Generation episode, Cause and Effect. This is where the Enterprise D gets stuck in a time loop, where they come across a temporal anomaly, Rift of the Week, and they encounter this old Federation ship. Now, initially, I thought it was the USS Reliant, but it's not a Miranda class. It's a Soyuz class. Yes, I'm a total Star Trek geek. And what happens is every time the ships collide, the time loop resets and the Enterprise comes back in it, and they have to constantly repeat this series of events. And so eventually they become aware that they're stuck in a time loop. And so they have to send a message back to realize that the courses of action suggested by Commander or Lieutenant Commander Data and Commander Riker, which one's the correct course of action? If you don't remember the episode, Data is the one who suggests they use a tractor beam to alter the other ship's trajectory before it hits the Enterprise. The Enterprise loses power. They can't move out of the way. So they've only got two options. Use a tractor beam. Tractor beam doesn't work. It hits the warp nacelle and both ships are destroyed. But Commander Riker suggests that they decompress the shuttle bay, and that'll push the Enterprise out of the way. And they figure this out, but they have to figure out a way to communicate to themselves in the time loop, even though they don't have awareness, that it's Commander Riker who's going to make the winning decision. So I guess that just goes to show you, Commander Riker might not have been the best tactician, but he was really good at collision avoidance. Yeah, that's a bit of a joke. And of course, it's because Riker has 3 pips. Data suddenly starts putting up the number 3 and has the number 3. I'm not kidding. It is the number 3 in the episode because Commander Riker has 3 pips. So when it comes to starship collision avoidance, go with his suggestion, decompress the shuttle bay. And yes, I'd be remiss if I didn't admit that Kelsey Grammer appears as Captain Morgan Bateson. If only we could have gotten a Star Trek show with Kelsey Grammer headlining it. Can you imagine? Maybe they could have even gotten Christy Alley to come back too, but that's just my mind going in crazy places. But the whole point about the recursion loop is that the Enterprise was stuck. Time was still passing. Now, there's another movie that handles recursion loop in a very different way, and that's Donnie Darko, an early 2000s movie. Now, I know people think that I give 2000s films a hard time, but there are some really good ones, and I would say Donnie Darko is one of those hidden gems, if you will. Now, a lot of people have seen it, a lot of people haven't. But what's it really getting at? Infinite recursion, a time loop. Now, there's a very simple diagram to explain this film. Now, if you're not familiar with this film, it's about Donnie Darko, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, and he has a dream where he encounters this rabbit, this very scary-looking rabbit. It's a Halloween costume, who's named Frank, and tells him to leave his bedroom and sit out under the sky. And he avoids being hit by a random plane engine that falls out of the sky. Now, what this film has to do with is alternating timelines and then a recursion loop. So there is this point in time where Donnie dies, and by Donnie dying, it prevents the end of the world. Now, a lot of people don't understand this, but I'll explain to you exactly how it works in this little diagram. So Donnie lives, and because of that, it leads to the end of the world. Why? Because the wormhole actually destroys the world, because it's an indication that there's some higher power that's actually going to prevent the world not being what it's supposed to be. That's what's in the film. But because of that, the higher power wants to give the character the chance to save the world. So the jet engine gets sent back in time, and Donnie decides that he needs to die. Otherwise, it will not prevent the end of the world. And so because of that, he stays in his room, and the engine falls on him and kills him. Now, of course, there's some legitimate questions. Why doesn't Frank tell him to get back in bed, and not allow the alternate timeline to be created where the world's destroyed? Because Frank represents some sort of dark entity in the movie. And no, the movie doesn't explain anything, and I actually think it works. It explains enough to make it intriguing. Donnie's mom and sister not being on the plane doesn't prevent the plane from not flying that path, right? Why wouldn't the plane hit the wormhole here? Simple, because the wormhole doesn't exist in the actual timeline. Now, is it possible that we're stuck in some kind of strange and crazy temporal recursion, that we're in a time loop? I'll admit it's one of my greatest fears. What if we're actually living these same series of events? Oh, yeah, that's a very good point. Right there. Black Uni Griffin. The director's cut is good. Yes, and I strongly recommend the director's cut. Just like I recommend the director's cut for Lawnmower Man and Kingdom of Heaven and many other films for that fact. So, I am Kairos. A squirrel prevented me from getting in a wreck the other night. Yeah, I see exactly what you mean. Oh, yes, and then there was Groundhog Day. That's another good one. I mean, there were some really good films that really hit it right on the nose. What a recursion loop is and what it's like. You know, in Groundhog Day, that's a single day. Could you imagine? I mean, what poor old Phil went through living that day over and over again. And just imagine if we don't have any awareness of it. You know, that's what was interesting to me about the Star Trek episode. They had a bit of a conscious awareness of it. Things felt familiar, but they didn't know. And I think that's what made it very, very intriguing. Now, yes, there have been some other movies that have looked at time loops. I'm not going to talk about Looper. The less said about that, the better. But, you know, there's many, many other examples where they show this entire principle in practice. Yeah, you know what, Michael? I'll say that Bruce Willis was by far and away the best part of that film. That's just my opinion. You know, that's just my opinion. But anyway, but that's the whole concept of being stuck in a recursion loop. And is that what we really see with the old calendars? That are they cyclical or are they circular? Are we trapped in a circle? Is the orbis, so to speak, if you know what I mean, really meaning that we're trapped in a form of a temporal recursion or a time loop? Is that really what it's alluding to? Is that why we see circles so many times? What the heck does it even matter? Yeah, Hollis, I see your comment. You know what happens when I try to mention that in a public live stream. But yes, you are correct. You're absolutely correct. And so it's one of those things that we really have to deal with because it may be possible that we're stuck in a recursion loop, that we're stuck living the same life over and over and over again. And that's why you have this feeling of deja vu. And you get to do it all over again. RB gets to relive thinking she's going to come across aliens and then they just don't ever come up. I go back thinking that, you know, one day we're going to be doing space travel, especially when I watched 2010, but then it just doesn't happen. We actually get to 2010 and, well, officially we're not even to the moon. Yeah. So I know you could just say, well, it's because technology and futurism, it prepared your mind for something that just wasn't possible. Give it a longer timeline, you know, 500, 1,000, 10,000 years. Eventually we'll get there. But the real point being is that things feel familiar and we're not exactly sure why. That these events repeat over and over again. Is that the ultimate fate of the world? Is that what we really are? We're stuck in a time loop. You know, Westworld's another good example. Reprogramming every single day. The film and then the first season of the TV series. And Sunny Kim, yeah, Dark City, where you've actually got some malevolent entity that's trying to get something out of doing all these resets. And then, hold on, Kathy, that's a good one. What if Earth exploded in 2012 and we all died? Yeah, who knows? You know, maybe I shouldn't have played that joke back on December 21st. I really wish I wouldn't have. Oh, well, some of the things that we regret, you know. But anyways, it's just one of the theories. So we've got end of the world, we've got infinite recursion and time loop, and we've got cycles but new events. So it's ultimately up to you to decide what's really going on. You know, are we living in cycles but new events? Did we actually have the end of the world and it's all a dream? It's a completely different reality. Or are we stuck in some kind of time loop and we're actually aware of certain events? We know that something happened, but we can't know it for sure. Just like the crew of the Enterprise did. We don't know that Commander Riker gave the right suggestion, and that's how we avoid a simple collision. Now, keep in mind, that's one single decision. The film Donnie Darko is about one single person in one single event. We know there are many more people, there are many more events that are happening. Is it possible that all these events are connected and they overlap? And then suddenly see how complicated this whole concept of time loop really gets when you run it down to its logical conclusion. Excuse me. Or, as was mentioned earlier, just look up the works of a certain science fiction author, a gentleman who wrote the novel that the film Blade Runner was based upon. That's the one. Oh, there you go, Chris. Thank you very much. Yes, A Scanner Darkly. Or read or watch A Scanner Darkly. Actually, the translation or the film adaptation of that was pretty well done too, in my opinion. Wasn't exactly a live action film, but it didn't need to be. So it'll give you all kinds of ideas of that. Now, for our final topic, What about creating a better world? And why does everyone always consider that crazy talk? And of course, when I say everyone, it's alluded to in many different ways. I mean, why can't we just create a better world? Well, does anybody remember the little dialogue, or the monologue, I should say, from Agent Smith in the original Matrix movie? Yes, the original Matrix movie, in my humble opinion, the best. The one that openly talked about all of the philosophy. And you may recall that what Agent Smith said is, we actually built a perfect world, but you wouldn't accept it. And then he says, it's because you live by one another's misery. That's the world that you'll accept. And then it comes down to this entire attitude. Now, is that really the way that we are, Jamie? Or is that the way that we are inclined to be for whatever reason? Is there something within us that can be incredible and strive to greatness? Or do we just simply prefer to, as Agent Smith says, live by one another's misery? Well, it's a belief system. It's ultimately up to you. But I'm just saying that I find it very interesting that we seem to adapt and go with this concept that, yes, we have to have some kind of system where some people live in misery and we enjoy the people who live in misery for whatever reasons. Or if you want a more on the nose comparison of it, you can read the old novella story, The Ones Who Walk from Omelius. Just read that. It'll tell you what this is all really about. Anyways. And there you go, Carol. Great point. Break the programming and choose for yourself. And that's ultimately what this is all about. And that's what all of us can do. Yeah, Eric, somebody definitely seems to think so, don't they? Question is who? Jamie, that coming from a machine? Yeah, exactly. But let's just take a look. What is our present world like? Well, we talked about on a couple explorations how in what is officially the nation with the largest gross domestic product in the world, therefore technically the wealthiest. Yes, it also has the most debt, but it wouldn't have the most debt if its credit was bad, right? Has an inordinate amount of roads with a lot of potholes in it. Yes, of course, I'm talking about the United States. And it's virtually in every state you'll find a road like this, and some roads that are even worse. And no, this is not a gravel road. This is a paved road, whether you want to say it's paved with asphalt or concrete. But yes, this is the situation that a lot of us are accepting in the United States. This isn't one of the side roads in Iraq that had M1A1 tanks driving on it for a long period of time. Oh, no, 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 no. This is the United States. So yes, I suppose, and if we're going to accept it in the country that's the wealthiest or officially the wealthiest, then we're going to accept it everywhere, right? And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the old I-35 bridge collapse in Minneapolis and St. Paul, the metro area up there in Minnesota. And that's a more recent constructed section. But don't worry, there's for channel members, you saw that they're taking measures in Minneapolis to ensure that such things like this never happen again. But this did happen, infrastructure collapse. Now, that's the real question I have. How much of our infrastructure is actually from our current era, and how much of it is very, very old? We always look at the dams, and you might be surprised to know how many dams that we have that we're very dependent upon, that are very, very old, and you might even classify as old world architecture. Now, if anybody knows where this is, extra points to you, but I mean, this could be a dam anywhere. There were apparently a lot of dams that were constructed during the quote-unquote Great Depression, but after that, we really haven't built a lot of that infrastructure. So I guess you just need one of the worst economic situations in the world, and then you're going to build incredible infrastructure. At least that's what official history will say. And Leo with a great point here. They forgot how to maintain them. Is there not a lot of evidence that indicates to us that somebody forgot to maintain things? Now, the official explanation will be, we just don't have the money. Yeah, that's always the explanation. How can we not have the money? Especially in the United States. We're $30 trillion in debt in the United States. You want to tell me we don't have the money? I'm not buying that, so to speak. But that's just my opinion. I could be completely wrong. And as Jamie says, everything is made to be broken now. And I don't think anybody's going to be building a dam anywhere anytime soon. Again, it's just my opinion. But really, why aren't we building new dams? Why aren't we building new roads? Why isn't every single road pristine, or, even say 75% of the roads pristine in the United States at least? Why? Don't ask those questions, okay? There's only certain sections. Now, of course, I go back here to Des Moines and looking at the wonderful 801 Grand building. This structure was built in, I think it was 1989, memory serves. I recall watching it grow up. And very, very interesting because it was quite a spotlight on the skyline in Des Moines. And yet, for whatever reason, it still doesn't compare to the Iowa State Capitol. In fact, if you approach Des Moines, the Iowa State Capitol grabs your attention more to the 801 Grand Building. It's a nice building. Don't take me wrong. I think it's very much the very best that we can do. But you go on the interior, and there is no comparison with the interior of the Iowa State Capitol. And then, of course, there's this lovely building here in Paris. I don't remember how to pronounce it. The Mount Paris, I think that's how you pronounce it, Mount Paris, Tour Mount Paris, this very interesting monolithic structure on the skyline of Paris, virtually the only skyscraper there. It's over 50 years old now. You talk to actual residents of Parisian or residents of Paris, they're not very, very fond of it. I can't imagine why. I mean, it's a New World building, right? Layout, that building is hideous. Oh my goodness. Kathy with a good comment here. A new bridge was just built across the Ohio River connecting Louisville with southern Indiana. Ah, yeah, that Evansville Bridge. It's amazing. Yeah, I mean, we can still do this, but can we do it like we used to? That's what I really wonder. And that's always the question. But yeah, Paris, a city that we traditionally associate with a lot of old world architecture. It's got its own little skyscraper, and people aren't fond of it. Don't worry, though. The New Yorker wrote a very fervent defense of it. And here's the interior. Ah, yes, that lovely current shopping arcade that we have. Nothing says late 20th, 21st century like this layout. And look, maybe you find this wonderful and maybe you enjoy doing this. Hey, I'll admit, I miss going around the old malls and actually seeing people, but that's just me. I'm kind of old school. I'm not afraid to admit it. I've got nothing against Amazon and ordering something that I need right away, but it's just interesting looking at how these buildings work, especially when you compare it to another arcade, an older arcade in Paris. Ah, yes, this is also considered a shopping arcade. Quite a bit of difference, wouldn't you say? And even with some of the Christmas lights that they have hanging here from the windows, you can see that there's a little bit of a difference in the architecture. I love the mosaic floor. Ooh, look at that. Another one of those 8-pointed stars. Well, we see those everywhere, don't we? Huh. But then even looking up here, our favorite little laurel wreath. And yeah, I mean, I guess we have all that Roman influence, don't we? That's what we'll attribute it to. But yeah, that's what an old arcade looks like. So really, at the end, what do we have? What do we know? And Leo says it really well. Night and day difference. Why wouldn't we want to create a better world or make it a better place? Why don't we want to have the old concepts where we actually saw and talked to people? Why is that slowly moving? Well, you could say it's the will of the people. We want to live an easier life. I want to stay in my home. So I'm more than content to have everything delivered to my door. And I'll be honest with all of you. I can see that inclination in all of us, and including myself. But living life, I've also learned there is something to be said for putting out the effort and actually connecting with people, going out and actually doing things. So I know you're thinking, oh my gosh, what the heck's going on here? A YouTube content creator is saying that he's actually lamenting the fact that he doesn't encounter people face to face. I still do. I'm just letting you know that I value it. I value any sort of interaction. I think it's important. And I think that's really the key that we have if we're actually going to build a better world. And I don't think it is crazy talk. I am Kairos. Why build with glory if someone knows the reset date? That's a good point. Or is it because we just don't have the ability anymore? We're doing our best to maintain it and doing our best to replace it wherever we can. Who knows? It could be either explanation. Can't discount either one. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this exploration. Really just looking at some theories. Please hit that like button before you go and support the channel. It was great for everybody to be here and contribute your ideas, and I'm definitely going to read through the comments because I've seen a lot of doozies. I know these tend to go a little bit faster sometimes than we like, but I think what's important to understand is it's not just important to understand where we've been, but also to understand where we're going to be going, or in other words, look to the future, because I would like to believe that we do still have a future. Hey, Brother Adam, good to see you. Hope all's going well. So anyway, I hope all of you have a wonderful week wherever you're on the land. Please hit the like button before you go, and we'll see you on the explorations coming up this week. And I think we'll do another live stream next weekend because I'm really enjoying these, and I hope you're enjoying them too. But either way, thanks for being here. Thank you for supporting the channel, and everybody, take care of yourself. This is Lucius Aurelian signing off.